Have you ever read your Chumash? Have you ever read your Bible, as the Goyim say? And the inspiration for this subject is a medrash in Medrash Tanchuma. The Chachomim tell us a principle. They say, Yehu divrei Torah regilim beficho ki'ilu shematem hayom misinai. Let the words of Torah be familiar, regular in your mouth, as if you heard it today for the first time, as if today you heard them from Har Sinai. You should realize that this medrash is a riddle, an enigma. I mean, it's completely contradictory. On the one hand, the words of Torah should be regular in your mouth, meaning you should be exceedingly familiar with them. On the other hand, you should hear them as if you heard them today for the first time from Sinai. So I want to do with you exactly that. I want to go to probably the best known words of the entire Chumash. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. What is there new to hear about these words? You ask any guy with a modicum of education, how does the Bible begin? And he says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. When one of the first American astronauts went into orbit around the earth, something that you can now do on your own tourist ticket, he brought with him a little Bible, and when he looked there up in space to all the miracles of the cosmos that were surrounding him, he quoted, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I want to convince you that the Torah doesn't begin with the words, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. I want to try to open your eyes for not only the beauty, but the profound meaning and construction of the Hebrew language. Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. Rashi already remarks on the word Bereshis that it doesn't mean in the beginning, it means in a beginning. Because in the beginning would be Bereshis. Bereshis in Hebrew, the definite article is a hey. So if you have a king, it's called Melech. You have a king, it's still Melech. You have the king, it is Ha-Melech. You have Reshis, beginning. A beginning, still Reshis. The beginning, not Ha-Reshis, but Ha-Reshis. The vowel gets lengthened because the Resh can't get a dog, but that doesn't matter. There is a definite article. Ha-Reshis. If it's in the beginning, it's Ba-Reshis. If it's for the king, it's La-Melech. Not Le-Ha-Melech, but La-Melech. Right? So, Bereshis simply doesn't mean in the beginning. Except if you interpret it as a smichus. What is a smichus? A smichus is two words that are next to each other and are closely connected to each other, and therefore this smichus, this construction of the two words next to each other, indicates a strong relationship between them. For example, a horse is sus, a king is melech, the horse is hasus, the king is ha-melech, the horse of the king is sus ha-melech. So you simply put the two words next to each other, and the beginning of creation would be Reshis Habrio. Habrio means the creation. Reshis Habrio. Doesn't say that, it says Bereshis Bora. The construction smichus. And we have to figure out where it is here in our verse, in our pasuk. Bereshis Bora Elokim es hashumayim es ha'oretz. Oh, let's look to the next word. Boro. Now I have to explain something about Hebrew verbs. Hebrew verbs come in two forms. Let's take a very simple word like kosaf, he wrote. Kosaf, he wrote. If you have learned some Hebrew, then you know that the future tense, as they say, is yichtov. It's yichtov. Well, I have news for you. There is no future tense and no past tense in Hebrew. They do not exist. Hebrew does not have the temporal system that other languages have. For example, those of you who know a little bit of French know that you have the present tense and the past tense. You have another past tense, and then you have the perfect future and the imperfect future, and a whole string of and it's je fais, I do, je ferai, I will do, and j'ai fait, I have done. I mean, many different forms. All this doesn't exist in Hebrew. There are just two, what we call tenses, right? Past tense and future tense, but it's far better to call them by their traditional name, namely perfect and imperfect. Imperfect means an ongoing action. Perfect means an action that has taken place already or will have taken place already, but it's talking about a finished action. So, we use the future tense also in narrative. And then he did that, and then he did that, and then he did that, and then he did that. So, for example, the beginning of the Megillah, of Megillas Esther. Vayehi bimei Achashverosh. And it happened. It occurred. Or the beginning of Rus. Vayehi bimei Shefot HaShoftim. Vayehi ro'ov be'oretz. Vayelech ish mi beis lechem Yehuda. The story is Vayehi, Vayelech, Vayichtov, Vayokam, Vayochal, Vayigash, and so on, and so on, and so on. This va construction we call the vav hahipuch, because we have in our mind that Yigash is he will approach and Vayigash is he approached. It's not the right way to think about it. What actually is this, the vav hahipuch is actually the narrative vav. The vav that expresses that something is going on and something else is going on and one thing follows the other. That is the style of Hebrew narration. And you find it all through Vayadaber Hashem el Moshe Lema. It tells you a story. And then this happened and then that happened and that happened. The perfect tense is used in a completely different way. The perfect tense always talks not about something that is ongoing in the story, but something that has happened already. And this is a very powerful way of looking at psukim. I really invite you to try, even if you need a translation, follow it word by word and see which words are being used and how they are being used. It's never too late to learn, and biblical Hebrew, the Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, is the key to understanding. If we don't teach our children Lashon Kodesh, we can forget about educating our children as authentic Jews. Oh, of course, I'm saying too much here. I'm implying far too much. Of course, it's possible. The problem here is that if we are not doing our journey on a full tank of petrol, we are running on the gases that are left in the tank. And somebody or a generation that forgets the Holy Tongue, even though we don't speak it, will inevitably run out of fuel. I'll give you an example. I mean, we just had Hanukkah behind us. And the Greek diaspora of Alexandria in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Alexandria was a huge city with millions of Jews, far more Jews in Alexandria than there were in Eretz Yisrael. But who are the people who preserved our Jewish heritage? It was the people in Eretz Yisrael and the people in Bavel as well, but not in Alexandria. The Greek diaspora was a fertile feeding ground for Christianity, for example, and the heritage of the Jewish Greek-speaking diaspora is completely lost. The only figure of note that it produced was called Philo of Alexandria, and he's very popular among Christians, as you may expect. And he doesn't play any role in our Jewish heritage. Clinging to the Hebrew language is extremely important. Now, Boro. So Boro is not Vayivra. Vayivra occurs later on in, and he created, and he made, right? Vayivra. That occurs later on in the story. Boro is he has created. Already done. Over and done with. That's why it's called a perfect tense. Perfect means done. Imperfect means not yet done. So, the use of this perfect is very often to set a scene. I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a king in a castle, and he had a daughter, and he had a son, and he had a horse, and he had a minister, and he had a crown, and he had a throne. Did I say throne already? He had a throne. That's describing the scenery. And then, one day, a traveler arrived at the castle. Now the story starts. That's, in my opinion, how you should read Bereshis. It sets a scene. And it introduces the environment in which the story takes place. Now, follow me, please. Bereshis, in the beginning of. I'm going to translate. In the beginning of, because it's a smichus. And the first part of the smichus is translated usually with the word of. Bereshis, in the beginning of. And now I'm going to read what it is that it is the beginning of. All that, I rattled it off, and then then God said, let there be light. The beginning of the story is when God said, let there be light. That is the beginning of the creation story, the creation of the light. So I rattled off a whole description of the scenery. So let's have a look at the various things that are in that scenery. I'm going to jump to the beginning of the second pasuk just to make a point. Those 4 words. May I ask you, what does your translation say in the beginning of verse 2?
Astonishingly empty.
No. The whole 4 words.
When the earth was
very good.
empty.
When the earth was, and yours says?
Yes,
When the earth was. Okay, so very good. That is extremely good. It doesn't say, and the earth was.
No, when?
The Hebrew does not say, and the earth was, because that in Hebrew would be Vatehi ha'oretz. Just Vayigash Yehuda, Vayigash Elov Yehuda, and Judah approached him. Vatehi ha'oretz tauhu, and the earth was confused. Right? No, it says v'ha'oretz hoisa. That's not the imperfect, it's the perfect. So you have to keep in mind that it means had already become. That's what hoisa means, had already become. That's another verb put to bed. Then we have another couple of verbs here. We have only one more verb. merachefes. Merachefes, which is translated as hovering, which is a good translation. It means going over the surface of something without touching that surface. That's hovering, but very close to the surface. As a bird flies, you have these giant birds who swoop over the sea, and they come almost touching the water, but not quite. That's the picture that you should have in mind. By the way, this verb occurs only twice in the whole of Tanakh, here and in another place where it actually means a hovering bird. So we're well on track. What I wanted to talk about is the merachefes form of the verb, because this is neither a perfect nor an imperfect. What it actually is a participle. A participle a little bit like going. In Hebrew, it's not really a participle. It's really not a verbal form. It's a noun or an adjective, right? It means to be in the state of something, right? Merachefes. So you can say an oaf merachefes, a hovering bird. Like you say, Melech Moshel, a king who reigns, a reigning king. So it is used as a nominal form, not as a verbal form. So therefore we call it a participle. Of course, by some people that is simply the present tense of, but that's not true. It's really ascribing a quality to something. Here it is Veruach Elokim merachefes. Let's not translate Ruach for the moment. The Ruach of God was merachefes, was a merachefes, was an entity that is merachef, that is hovering. Okay, we have now had all the verbs. Now we go to trying to understand and to translate. I want to make a remark here. The purpose of a translation is never to render in a second language what the original said. That cannot be done. It simply cannot be done. So what is the function of trying to translate a pasuk or any other text? To not to get the meaning across to someone else, because you have failed already. It is to try to understand yourself what the meaning is. By probing how do I reflect in my own language that what I read? Let me try to find a translation, but then please throw the translation away. Do not use the translation. Use the translation as a key to see the original, all the nuances of the original language. And we'll come to one of those words here that I just quoted and refused to translate. But let's go and see where it brings us. So I'm going to offer a provisional translation, and I'll interrupt myself in some places where I want to make a remark. Bereshis, in the beginning of what? In the beginning of a situation where God had created, Bora Elohim had created, Es HaShomayim ve'es ha'oretz, the heavens and the earth. That already tells you something, that something happened before this even starts, right? Because it starts with God having created already the heaven and the earth. The creation of heaven and earth is not described here. It's not a repetition. It's the untold prequel to Bereshis. And that's, by the way, indicated by the fact that Bereshis starts with the letter Beis. So Bo Elohim is God has created already, had created already. There is your pluperfect. Very often the perfect tense is very well translated as a pluperfect, especially when it occurs in places where you would have expected the imperfect, the narrative. I'll give you a prime example. And again, these words are probably very familiar to you. Vayehi achar devorim ha'ele v'ha'elokim niso es Avraham vayomer elov Avraham vayomer hineni, the beginning of the Kedah. And it happened after these things that God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, and Abraham answered, Lord, here I am, hineni. It's not what it says. that would be Vayehi achar de Brimoele Vaynas Elohim es Avram, and God tested Avram. It doesn't say that. It says Elohim nisa es Avraham. God had tested. So now the translation becomes much more intriguing. And it happened after these things, whatever these things are, when God had tested Abraham. Then God, after he had tested him, then God said, Abraham, and then he gives him the assignment, go to Haram Maria and bring your son as a sacrifice. There are Chazalen that tell you, the sages pick it up and they say what this is about. But what I wanted to highlight to you is by translating the after God had tested Avram, now you know where our sages get it from, that Avram was tested 10 times and this was the last of the tests. It's there right in the text. It says that Abraham was tested already. That's a pluperfect. Elohim nisa, and God had tested. I'll give you another example. When Yaakov and Esau in the beginning of Toldos have a conversation, and Esau comes home and he's very tired and he's hungry, and Yaakov had cooked a meal, and he said, give me to eat from that meal. And then Yaakov said, sell me your firstborn right. And then Esau says, what do I care about the firstborn right? And he sells him the firstborn right, and then Yaakov gives him food to eat. Except that it doesn't say, and then Yaakov gave him food to eat. It says, Yaakov nosan le'esav lechem le'echal. And Yaakov had given, because otherwise it would have said, Vayitein Yaakov le'esav lechem le'echal. And that would be the narrative form, Vayitein. It doesn't say, Yaakov nosan, it says. What does Yaakov nosan mean? He had already given. Is that logical to think that Esau would come from the field, Yaakov would give him bread to eat, etc., and then he would say, I'd like to have afters as well, and I'll sell my firstborn right for the afters? No, he was hungry. That was the incentive that he was going to sell. It reveals a very interesting point. The point is, you can read Taldos until you're blue in the face. It never says that Yaakov addressed his brother Esau and said, I'm not going to feed you unless you sell me your firstborn right in exchange for the soup. It is what you think you know. It is what you think you remember of the story, but it never says that. It never ever says that. It simply says that Yaakov said to Esau, sell me your firstborn right. And it is Esau who drew the conclusion, it's a quid pro quo. I have to sell my firstborn right in order that he should give me the food that I need. Yaakov never said so. And the Torah very subtly points that out. When Yaakov actually, after the transaction is signed, sealed, kissed, and delivered, and Esau is on the hook, and he has sold the firstborn right, then it says, Yaakov nosan le'esav lechem le'echal. And Yaakov had given. What it says is, no, he gave it now, but he would have given in any case. Do you really think that if Esau comes from the field, he's tired, he is hungry, Yaakov has a meal there, and he says, give me to eat from the meal, and Yaakov says, sell me today your firstborn right, without saying that is the condition. That's Esau's conclusion. If Esau would have said, my dear brother, are you out of your mind? You think my firstborn right is worth a cup of soup to me and that's it? Of course not. I'd rather go hungry than selling my firstborn right. You think that Yaakov would have said, okay, brother, if so, you can starve to death as far as I'm concerned. Yaakov Avinu? No way. Yaakov would have said, Mazel tov, you passed the test, here's the food. But Esau was not. This is what Chazal say. Esau despised the firstborn right. He despised it. Yaakov valued it. Yaakov would never have bartered away his firstborn right for a cup of soup. All that is expressed in those two words. The Yaakov no son, Yaakov had given. You see how important it is to really, really understand what's going on. Now, let's continue. I'm going to take some more of your time, yeah? You stop me when you have had enough. So, Bereshis, in the beginning of something. And what is that something? That's Bora Elohim es Hashemayim es Haaretz. God had created heaven and the earth. Happened already. The base is the second letter. There is a prequel, there's a story that happened before the base of Bereshis. By the way, Chazal come and say there were 974 different worlds that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, and he created them, and then he destroyed them, and then he created them, and he destroyed them, and then he used the debris of all those previous worlds to build this world. This is a Chazal. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to say how much that parallels cosmological insights today. It happens to very much coincide with what science tells you, but that's not important. That's not what we're learning. We're learning Torah here. Okay, so that is Bora Elohim es Hashemayim es Haaretz. And now we already saw Haaretz Hoiso should be translated, and the earth had become. At that stage where the story starts, the earth had already become what? Tohu Vovahu. Tohu Vovahu. Another translation problem. The Va is usually translated and. Right? Confused and whatever. So Tohu, it is related to to'e, to to be lost on the way. It means chaotic. It means without structure. It means featureless, maybe. But Bauhu means something completely different. Bauhu actually is two words. Bau-hu. In it, it is. Bau-hu. It means it has potential. In it is implicit something else that can come out. So the Vav in between should not be translated as and, but as but. So I want to translate, not in order to suggest that you should write this translation down or that I would publish a translation of Genesis 1. No. It is to try to open your eyes for what the Hebrew says. As Tauhu Uvahu, I want to translate as chaotic but full with potential. Featureless but with a future. Bauhu. And now, by the way, that's two things. Tauhu, Bauhu. Two different things. Now we come to the next bit. Next bit of the description of the scenery in which the story starts. V'choshech al pnei tahom. It is choshech, darkness, al pnei, on something which is tahom, which is translated as the chasm or the deep or whatever, or the abyss. But have you noticed how similar it is to the word tohu? It seems to be, that cannot be coincidental, that you have tohu and tahom. The first three letters are identical. And then there's a mem at the end. Do we know words with a mem at the end? For plurals, the mem is being used. But you have also words like yaumum, today, shilshom, or chinom, for free. It comes from chen. Chen means grace. Chinom means with grace. So the mem at the end is a kind of an adverbial way. From yaum, you get yaumum, by day, the daytime, by daytime. So if something happens yaumum, it is an adverbial construction to tell you at what time this happened. If it's chinom, if it said that he did something, A did to B something chinom, it means without reason. Or sinas chinom, there you are. So the mem at the end of a word makes it into a kind of an adverbial word, a word that describes a situation. So taham is perhaps translated as, perhaps we have to understand it as a situation of confusion, of confusedness or something like that. And choshech is darkness. So this is, it seems to be that this is a very, if you enter a dark room, you can't find your way so easily.
Light, because light hasn't been created yet.
That is absolutely right. But choshech itself, we'll see that choshech is not just darkness. Let's continue for a second. That's one thing. Choshech al pnei tehom. Darkness on confused situations. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamoyim. Now, I'm sure that Spirit of God, but there's a problem. Ruach has two meanings. It's actually, when you translate it into English, you have to use two completely different words. Either wind or spirit. And it seems to have nothing to do with each other, but spirit actually is from the Latin word spiritus, which means wind, right? So the two are very much related. But let's look at why wind and spirit would have the same word in Hebrew. It's not that ruach has two meanings. It has only one meaning. It means ruach. But to convey that meaning in English, we have to use two different words, depending on the circumstances. But actually, it's one single thing. Whether it's wind or spirit, it's one single thing. And what is that single thing that ruach is? It is a mover. The wind is a mover, a propeller. You only have to put a sail on a sailing ship and you see how the wind propels your boat over the water. And the Spirit of God is the moving Spirit of God, the guiding Spirit of God, the propelling Spirit of God. So I want to translate it, not translate, but give you an idea of what the meaning should be here. It's V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamoyim, but, not and, but, it's a contrast with choshech al pnei tehom, but a moving force of God, or the moving force of God, was or is hovering al pnei hamoyim, right above the surface of the water. Well, you have to ask a couple of questions. Hey, all of a sudden it mentions water. I want to just give you a quick work on the first really narrative sentence of the story. Vayamer Elokim yehi. That's where the story starts. And then God said, and not and God said. You should translate it or understand it as then, after this opening scene where I've described to you what are we talking about, light should be. Yeah, light must become. Light be their light or whatever. Nothing can convey in English what yehi in Hebrew means. It means let light be, or light should become, or let there be light. Is not really yehi. But the answer is vayhi, and light was. And light was. That's really the beginning. That's we have a chazal that says Asora ma'amorim bo HaKadosh Baruch Hu es aloma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created his world with 10 utterances. This is number 2, not number 1, because Chazal say Bereshis nami mama have. Bereshis is also a word of creation, right? We say Baruch she'amar v'hoyo ha'olam. Blessed is he who spoke and the world was, meaning that the creation, in the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created his world, was by way of speech, right? By creative language. But Bereshis Bara Elokim is not a word. It's not. It doesn't say what happened. So Bereshis Nami Mama Have is acknowledging that the first actual speech, Vayamer Elokim yehi, really is coming after something, after this whole prequel of creation. So just want to touch on the next verse because you made a remark about the light and the darkness. So Vayar Elokim Esoel Kitov. I'm not going into how to translate it. It doesn't mean God saw the light and it was good. It's not like a painter who made a painting and then takes a couple of steps back and has a look. Yeah, maybe I should touch it up over there a little bit. Maybe, right? God doesn't inspect his own work. That is ridiculous. Vayar Elokim Esoel Kitov. Without justifying it, I'll give you what I think it means. I think, and God saw to it that the light would endure, would be tov, would hold out for the future. But that's a whole subject, why tov should mean that and not simply good. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that. Just whet your appetite. Maybe you want to hear some more about this. But I wanted to speak about... I skip until Pasuk 5. Vayikro Elokim lo al yam v'lachoshech koro lailo vayerev vayivoker yam echad. It beautifully illustrates one of my points that I made today. Vayikro Elokim lo al yam. Vayikro Elokim, and then God called the light day. V'lachoshech koro lailo. But to the darkness he had called, koro, not vayikro, koro, he had called night. So the night was named before the day. Although it says vayi erev vayivoker, right? It's confirmed in the pasuk. Vayi erev vayivoker. It was evening and it was day. Of course, the darkness was named before the light was named, because the darkness, as we saw in the first pasuk, already existed, and the light is the new player on the scene. So vayikro Elokim lo al yom, and God called the light day, but the darkness koro lailo. He had already called night. It clearly tells us that we do not quite understand what the Torah means by day and night in this context, because it clearly doesn't mean sunrise and sunset, right? Vayi erev vayivoker. Just to lift a little bit of the cover here, erev and boker are not expressions that simply mean evening and morning. Erev comes from le'arbev, to mix. An irbuvia is a mixture. That is erev. Boker, well, you have bikur, you have bikoret, meaning criticism, and you have also bokor, which means cattle. And the boker is somebody who, with his hooves, treads over the ground, and it breaks. Really, boker, break, even as in English and Hebrew the same consonants. Boker. And we have this exactly in English as well. We talk about night fall and day break. And this is exactly our experience. When it becomes evening, it very slowly darkens. You look outside, oh, it's getting darker already, it's getting darker already, it's getting darker already. And that's why we call it evening. It evens out between the day and the night. It gradually goes from daytime to nighttime. And we have even the halachic category of bein hashmoshas. It's a twilight sort. Oh, twilight in English. Twilight, double light. Light and not so light. And this is twilight. That's evening. It's evening out. Boker, when it is dark and the sun rises a tiny bit above the horizon, all of a sudden, the day breaks. It's a psychological thing because, of course, if you take a photometer, you don't see any difference. You can run it backwards and then you have exactly, but psychologically, that's what Chazal tell us. A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. You can't come into a well-lit room and say, I have a little darkness here. Look at my darkness. You can't see it. You can come in a completely dark room with a little light and say, look, here's a little light. That's the difference between day and night. That's why it says, Vayi Erev, Vayi Voker.
Yom Echad.
That's a better way of understanding this, and it avoids the problem that you raised, that the sun and the moon and the stars, that are the measures of time, had not yet been created. But that's just a way of understanding it.